how do I carefully introduce this lesson to my students so that they don't feel scared about the KKK?
There's a couple things that I would say that's useful here. I think that, and this is something I think a lot about, is how we can use the content that we're teaching as a way in before we start to say, before we jump into today's world, right? So there is a little bit of a historical distance that's part of the story. It's why the historical specificity of Indiana in the 20s in this particular case, I think helps quite a bit. But I also think it would be irresponsible not to frame an essential question and not to frame learning goals that don't help people think about past and present. So, I mean, so think about your learning goals, think about the use of content that provides a little bit of distance, but also make sure that you teach the stories as Jill did, that not everybody supported this stuff, right? Jill included some of the stories of folks that were resisting this as well. But I also would say that disease is not a bad thing. We should be uncomfortable in the face of bigotry.
And by extension, discussing these sort of sensitive issues has the potential to be upsetting for students, all students, but for immigrant students in particular. What are some of the things teachers can do to make them feel safe and supported by learning about this issue?
I think the first thing you do is make sure that they feel that their voices are heard, that they're welcome participants, that we leave opportunities to build on the knowledge that they come into the classroom with, allow them to be contributors, right? So often I think much of this is about tone, right? I'm not saying that this isn't going to be uncomfortable, but if you don't feel that safe in schools in general, it doesn't matter what content you're teaching. So 60%, I posted it in the chat earlier, 60% of school administrators report that there's anti-immigrant bias in their schools. I actually think that there's a message that by not teaching about this stuff, that you're being silent and to a certain extent complicit. So to me, if you're in a classroom where an educator sends a message that they care, it matters. And there's little small things that you can do, right? So I remember watching the emergence of teachers that were working to intentionally create safe spaces for LGBTQ kids, right? And they would, have a flag on their desk, or or literally signs, "This is a safe space here." And so, the same thing can be happening with people who are teaching immigrant origin kids, with with the butterfly that's telling the story of migration, right? Think about what are the symbols that you're sending kids to know that you are an ally.
And Jill, we have a lot of questions for you.
Yeah.
Julian wanted to know, you said that the main targets for the Klan after its rebirth in the 20s were immigrants and Catholics rather than Blacks. Was that the situation across the US? Was it different in different states or different in the South?
The easiest way to think about it is whatever the threat to the white supremacy in that area was, that's who they went after. So in California, we see the Klan going after Hispanic workers. We see them going after Japanese immigrants. In the South, there was still violence against African Americans, but it's important to remember that all across the country, that just the robes and the masks that they're wearing is an act of terrorism. They are intentionally referring to that post-Civil War Klan that did relentlessly pursue and lynch African Americans by the thousands. So, and there's also great stories of Black resistance. Black voters came out in record numbers to vote against Klan members, for example.
And Pablo had a really great question here. When you analyze the data on hate crimes, you usually find reports by Blacks, Jews, Muslims, LGBTQ, but very few by immigrants themselves. And then we know that language and lack of trust may be amongst the reasons, but are either of you aware of successful campaigns that educated immigrants in order to file a complaint with police when they become victims of hate?
I know a good model in the UK, a very, very good model in the UK called Tell Mama. and Tell Mama was actually looking at particularly anti-Muslim hate. And what they did is where it did a lot of local events. It was a lot of local events bringing in authorities, but it's been very hard, right? The last 4 years, authorities have been so often been a sign of danger, right? From racial profiling. So you got to start by building some trust within the community. And if I were an immigrant, which I am not, I think I would want to see some very upfront sign that people in the authorities are open, right? And I think it has to start there, and then we can do some bridge building.
Yeah, you may be surprised if you dig a little bit at local grassroots organizations who are seeking to empower their immigrant communities, showing them the avenues that immigrants have for recourse, for representation, that kind of thing. And a few more questions before we wrap up. Allison wanted to know how much the Buy American campaigns of US automakers connects to the legacy that you'll talk about. And perhaps there are other campaigns that you can point to, political campaigns and others.
I mean, I think that campaign, even groups that we consider to be more mainstream patriotic organizations, we're using America First, the American Legion. Some of the language there sounds almost exactly like the Klans. So,
no, can I just add with the Buy American thing? There's a couple comments about this, thinking about American identity, and so there's a thought here that we need to find a way to balance, a vision of the United States. It shouldn't be owned just by the hate folks, right? So it's going to be really important that when we teach these stories, we recognize that America has a complicated but dual narrative, and we should be teaching both sides of it, right? From Emma Lazarus' words that are on the Statue of Liberty, right? That is an American narrative too. So we have to make sure that we're thinking very carefully, because we are a country that still, when it comes to numbers of the newcomers, we're still the place that has, much larger numbers. So that balance matters. And American identity has been recreated in really wonderful ways through layers and layers and layers of immigration. Right.
And as you talk about narrative, Elizabeth has a great question. And I don't know if, Elizabeth, you want to clarify what you mean in the chat box. You're saying that educators are teaching students and their families. How do we speak with families who don't believe the truth and go with the fake story of the United States?
Oh boy, isn't that a great question? I mean, so first of all, I would think about one of the opportunities for interaction, right? Be with parents, because are there formal opportunities? Are there not formal opportunities? So I mean, I think it depends. I would be very, very strategic in thinking about my different communication points, from letters home to the messaging in the building, right? Because there's subtle stories that we can be telling in our school buildings before we even have to say, oh, we're going at just tell this one story. Let's start with, does this building feel like an inclusive place? Right? And then sending messages both to white parents, but also to parents of color and to immigrant families. What are the voices that we honor? How much are we being careful in helping people rethink the historical narrative of this country, without saying that you can't talk about certain folks in the past, but as a reminder, a good percentage of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were immigrants. Not a surprise, right? But we don't talk about it that way, right? So how can we be intentional in making sure that we don't just teach migration as in moments and just teach the anti-immigrant bigotry, right? Because I think it's about sending messages of inclusion all along the way that you're going to bring parents in.